People are frequently obsessed with royalty. Not necessarily the people who actually lived in the time of royalty, mind you, but modern people. We can't get enough of royal families, and we've made the language of royals part of our everyday talk, even in sports. As with many pop culture trends, these analogies are hard to perfectly pin down. This is what you don't know about college basketball's blue bloods. Welcome to What You Don't Know About Sports, where we delve into the forgotten stories, teams, and athletes of sports history and question widely held takes on today's sports. I'm Matt, and this is Blake.
Good day, everyone.
And we're British now. And today, with the college basketball season upon us, we wanted to address one of the newest arguments in the sports landscape, blue blood status, at least in college basketball. Blake, regardless of the sport and the level of sport, what team or program do you think has the most prestige anywhere in the world?
When you say prestige anywhere in the world, my mind immediately goes to European soccer for multiple reasons. They have the most chance to win titles. So if you count greatness, as we love to do in America, by championships, whether it's an individual athlete or a team, the best have won the most championships. And in European soccer, seems to be countless tournaments going on at the same time, and usually the same teams win them all. There's in most European leagues, there's probably little flexibility in who wins. But so my mind immediately goes there. I would say I don't know that I could come up with a single team, but I'm thinking like a Bayern Munich or Real Madrid or Barcelona or Milan or PSG. There's so much parity in English soccer in the EPL that it's hard to pin one of those. Definitely not Man City, because Nottingham Forest has more Champions Leagues than Man City, 2-0, by the way. So don't get me with that. So I would say European soccer, one of the major teams over there has to be it.
Norwich City, 2 Champions League titles, but no Saudi Arabian blood money. So
see, isn't that how it's done?
Yeah. I think you're wrong, because I think the Homer answer is it's the New York Yankees, because they've got 27 titles, period. And if we're going to count FA Cups or Copa del Rey or whatever, where we're playing a tournament against the same teams we're already playing against in the league, then let's count the playoffs in baseball as well, where in a playoff setting, the Yankees have won 11 pennants. They've won 40 total, but they won the American League 11 times in a tournament format. We should add those. That's 38. And if we're going to count stuff inside of a season, then I say we count the 20 division titles too. And by my math, conservatively, that's 58 championships for the Yankees.
If that were different competitions, I would say yes. But to win those, you play one best of 3 or 5 or 7 game series, and you can win them. It's not 3 different competitions going on simultaneously in a bracket format. You beat one. It's head to head, right? You head to head. Now, of course, the season is terrible because it takes a year and a half to finish a baseball season.
You mean amazing.
But it's, but I get the math, and winning the trophies look nice, but it's not the same. It's not the same as competing in the FA Cup and the Premier League title. it's not the same because it's the same competition, and that's baseball's fault for not hosting mid-season things like European soccer. Like we've said before, that we think NBA should do that. Have a preseason thing, a big blowout in the preseason, and then like a mid-season, mid-regular season break, and host a invitational or something.
Yeah.
In like maybe the last few champions get to come back and play in this cool like mid-league or mid-season league thing and get a fancy trophy for it and stuff. But I appreciate the effort.
Well, you know what? It's my truth. So
Very homerish, but yes. I also say European soccer simply because that's the most popular sport in the world, right? Like no one outside,
yeah.
no one.
Yeah.
I mean, very few countries outside of the United States care about baseball, and so other than Central America likes baseball, and
Japan.
because Japan
Korea.
likes Asia likes baseball, but like Europe they don't care. But we could say the same thing about cricket. Like the most prestigious the most prestigious team or program in the world is probably like an English cricket team or something that we don't know about. So very homerish here.
I've got a lot of crickets in my backyard, I think.
Same thing.
Speaking,
you're basically an expert.
Yeah. Speaking of sports that have tournaments and multiple competitions going on inside of a season, this week's episode is about college basketball and the idea of blue bloods in general. So we thought we'd tell you where the term comes from first, so we're all working with the same definition, and where it comes from inside the sport of college basketball, which is actually more interesting than I thought it was going to be. So anyway, the term blue blood itself was the first known written example of the term. It's from 1811 and refers obviously to the nobles and the wealthy of the world. The idea here is that these people at the time did not have to be outside like the regular people who had to farm and such outside getting a tan. They could be inside away from the sun, and they had very pale skin as a result of this. That pale skin became kind of a status symbol, especially if you go look at paintings and such from that time period, much like our beauty standards are kind of reflected in what we show. All those paintings have people with like white skin, and that's a status symbol thing. The pale skin, these Europeans, made their veins more visible to an onlooker, and your veins naturally appear a little bit blue because of the way the light reflects there, and so we get this idea of blue bloods. And it may go even further back than that in pop culture, all the way back to 9th century Spain, where classes were divided on the same kind of color blood logic. So this is an idea that is steeped in Western culture from the way back.
I have noble and wealthy. That's what I took from that. If you think it, if we're going forward as we're talking, think about college basketball and college programs in general. The nobles and the wealthy. The ones with the money. Let's think about that as we go forward.
Texas is back, baby. Okay, so
we throw that in every time, whether it's relevant or not, but why not?
Eventually, if people keep saying it, it will be true, or the world will end. I know where I've placed my money on that bet. The use of the term in college basketball in particular, and shout out to Andy Katz, formerly of ESPN, now of CBS and the NCAA, who has done a very good job of cataloging this. So I'm not gonna repeat his research. I'm just going to tell you about it. If you search for Andy Katz and Blue Bloods, you'll find this article here. But he's done a great job. He searched a newspaper database to find basically every use of the term blue blood in a sports section of a newspaper. And it appears from his research that there are 3 distinct eras of this term being used. The earliest version he found was from January 3rd, 1937, in a paper called the Times Union out of Brooklyn. they referred to the Rochester Centrals as being made up of basketball blue bloods. And so here they're talking about the players themselves on the team are of a high quality, well respected, highly recruited or sought after. And so here they're using it as the players are the blue bloods. And most of the instances throughout the 30s and early 40s deal with the players. And it seems to be here a general use term. It's covering multiple sports, or kind of using this phrase, these are the blue bloods, that guy's a blue blood, this, that, and the other. And that is the first era of the term blue blood. So the 1930s, they're talking about players, not yet teams or anything else. I thought that was a different way of looking at it. That
I've never heard of that before. I've never heard of people calling a person a blue blood because, of course,
right.
all I've ever heard is people calling college basketball programs. And so when you talk, but I mean, it kind of goes back to the noble and wealthy thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so
it would be a person that was wealthy,
they're talking about people in old England and even Spain back in the day. And so they would be talking about the wealthy, not necessarily that they're still pale at this point in history, but maybe they just come from status, or they're held to a high standard. Maybe not because they come from wealth or whatever royalty, but they're just good at the sport, which is equivalent.
Right. As the term begins to evolve, and as sports writing begins to evolve as well, this kind of language does shift to become more towards teams. Katz found that the first instance of it being used to talk about teams was in a February 1st article from 1946 from the Charlotte News from a man named Dick Dunkel, who I just wanted to make sure we mentioned that was a real person's name. Dick Dunkel of the Charlotte News, hashtag got to BNC. He posted a set of rankings of schools, this is like the equivalent of an Athlon sports magazine or something, where he's ranking every team that plays major college basketball. He had a formula to use to do it. He referred to his list as a ranking of basketball blue bloods. The insinuation being that if you were ranked high enough, you were a blue blood. The AP as a whole used this term itself in 1953 when it released its top 20, back in the day when it was only a top 20 and not a top 25. Everybody gets a trophy now.
I was about to say that.
Back when it was a top 20, Murray, which we now know as Murray State, appeared in the poll, and they wrote a quote that said, "Murray, a new member of the nation's top 20 basketball blue bloods, moves into the Midwest hotbed of the hoop sport tonight to test its survival as a ranking giant." So the term kind of moves from being about players to being about teams, but it's being used as a replacement for saying this is a top 20 team, this is a ranked team, this is a good team. We're just saying that the teams that are good are all blue bloods, not necessarily for any criteria other than here are the best 20 teams right now. They're the blue bloods.
And at this point, there's no historical talk about how good the team has been in the past. This is a present day best 20 teams in the country. They are considered the blue bloods because of the talent level and because of their wealth of talent, you could say. So I'm going to keep going back to those words. I thought that was very that was very good.
It's a good definition there.
Mm-hmm.
The final kind of evolution, the one we're in now, is to begin to use blue blood to not just mean you're good right now, but it's a historical greatness kind of situation. And it's as the term gains maturity, but it's also as the sport hits maturity level where it is like ingrained popular in many parts of the country, then we start talking about it with historical context involved. So some of the schools that we may bring up as blue bloods here in a few minutes, Kentucky gets first mentioned as a blue blood in the 1980s. Several articles call them specifically basketball's blue blood or the bluest of blue bloods, right? Kentucky was still very much in the height of its powers pre sanctions before John Calipari pulled them out. That's the wrong person that I just said pulled them out. Rick Pitino, the other sleazy coach. My mistake. So they're the bluest of blue bloods. Villanova, who is going to be part of the argument, I think, was included as a blue blood in 1983 because they played in the Big East. In that year, several articles labeled the entire conference a set of blue bloods. So we still haven't fully evolved the term here because instead of it being a set of rankings, it's just this is the best conference. So those teams are blue bloods. Duke, bucking the trend that we may think of now, was called a blue blood before they ever won a national title. Now this was a little bit homerish. It was by the Raleigh News and Observer's Chip Alexander in 1990. Local folks will be familiar with him. But yeah, 1990, before their first national title, they were coming off a couple of Final Fours or deep runs in the tournament. And so he called them blue bloods. Then Indiana got labeled blue bloods, the same News and Observer. Virginia had been on a run to the Final Four, and they remarked in beating Indiana that they had beat one of the sport's blue bloods. In 1993, they had a matchup with Kansas in the tournament that was reported as two of basketball's blue bloods. UNC, you'll enjoy this, was first labeled in 1988 when they played Indiana in the National Invitational Tournament, not in the NCAAs. Both teams happened to be in the 80s, which is not something you would think of. But in the 80s, both teams found themselves in the NIT. And one of the previews for that game remarked that it was a little crazy that these two high-level teams, a battle of the blue bloods, was taking place in the preview show. UCLA, who many people know of, was a juggernaut in basketball's formative years, has one of the fewest numbers of mentions you might think of one of these schools, mostly because they were really good before this 1980s era when it has reached full maturation. And if you're wondering if we're the first time here, I know it was a big deal in the last year's 2021's Final Four, technically 2022's Final Four, that it was the blue blood Final Four and people had some issue with Villanova being labeled one. If you thought this was the first time that we had this discussion, it is not. This century, Arizona, Louisville, Michigan State, and Florida have all had blue blood attached to their name in articles. Wisconsin did as well. Before anybody freaks out, it's because a beat writer wrote that Wisconsin hadn't been a blue blood since the beginning of the century, last century, remarking about their 1940s NCAA championship. All told, in his research of the newspaper.com database, there were 14 instances of the term blue blood in the 1980s, 68 in the 1990s, 202 in the 2000s, and then when this conversation fully took off, the 2010s had 1,029. So far in the 2 years of the 2020s,
oh my God,
we got 212 already.
Oh God, we are just getting started, people.
We love the word blue blood.
God, so we heard it. We heard it during basketball season. Like basketball season hasn't even started yet as of this recording. And at the beginning of this college football season, Kentucky, Kansas, Duke, and UNC were all 3-0. And every news outlet was talking about how the blue bloods are making a statement in football too, and blah, blah, and now we all suck. But well, except a couple of the teams. But Kansas has fallen off anyway. Yeah. But it's weird that this term of it's like a term of endearment for some teams, but I'm curious as to where this is going because I'm still a little torn. But this is just a weird argument. There's no exact answer. Obviously, it's up to personal interpretation. But it is an interesting conversation to have.
Yeah, we're gonna look at some statistics and try to have the conversation here in a few minutes. But just the history of it to me, it very much seems like it is a thing that's just become part of the conversation. Started as sports in general, and then it kind of moved just to a college basketball specific thing. Like nobody talks about blue bloods really anywhere else. But like you said, I've seen some people try to make it a thing in college football because there's not really a term for it there. But the most I've seen it was when those schools were all together there, and but then the term bleeds into football, and now I think you're going to start seeing it more there. But to watch,
Alabama's a blue
yeah,
blood of college football. It was like, no,
but
stop it.
it's like, yeah. And it's like anything else. It's like once you've defined, no matter when it happens, once you've defined this is the term and these are the things that we put in the term, it's really hard to change it from that point forward, which is why I think that new blood term got coined because you got people that are just never going to call certain things a blue blood. But there's got to be some way to describe some schools that we're going to talk about later. But it's time. It's time. It's time for trivia.
Time for trivia.
And look, there's the production. We've
We're
always
gonna record. We're gonna cut that, and we're gonna use that. We're gonna use that every time.
All right. So your job. We're going to shift gears here because we're going to talk about some college basketball polls. Obviously, coming up, we're going to shift gears. We're going to talk about football for just a moment because football is still happening. In the first 70 years of the AP college football polls, that's from 1936 when it started through the 2005 season, I want you to name for me the 5 schools. It's a trick question. I want you to name the top 5 schools in which there are 6 because it's college football and it's weird. There's a tie for 5th. So the 6 schools that make up the top 5 most appearances in the AP poll. So this would be the top 20. I think it might have been a top 15 at one point. The top 20 or what we now know as the top 25. So the most appearances in that poll from its beginning in 1936 through 2005, the 70th year of the poll.
Okay, so just appearances, not
not number one, not top 10.
Okay,
anytime appearing in the poll.
Number of weeks that programs have appeared.
Correct.
So but you said there's 6, so I get to name 5.
There's 6 that make up the top 5. No, I didn't name all 6. Dang it.
No, I probably can't. Let's see.
Oh, you can.
36 to 05.
Yep.
Okay, so I need to ask some questions.
Yes.
What could you give me what conferences? Let me think. What conferences they currently play in? Is that relevant?
I can do that for you. If we're talking about where they currently play, there are 3 members of the Big Ten, 1 member of the Big 12, and 1 member of the Pac-12, and also an independent. 3 Big Ten, 1 independent, 1 Big 12, 1 Pac-12.
I gotta write these down so I remember. 3, 1, 1, 1, 1. That was too many ones. 3, 1, 1, 1.
Yes.
I have a feeling I know who the independent is.
Yeah.
Is it Notre Dame?
Go ahead. Notre Dame is the independent. They are 3rd on the list as of that date with 691 weeks. That was 73.5 of all the percentage, 73.5% of all polls to that point they had been in. Number 3.
Nice. Okay. I'm going to guess one of the Big Tens being Michigan.
Michigan, as of that date, was number 1, 731
That is ridiculous, and
It
they're
is.
still up there too. So that is continued even into this century.
Yeah, still.
Michigan. I'm just gonna keep guessing. I think for now.
Guessing's
I have
good for the
I have
first
some
bit of this. Yep.
ideas. I have some
Yeah.
ideas. Nebraska.
Okay. Really? That was what you just said, Nebraska, and you were right. I was 100% sure that Nebraska was going to be the one that stumped you.
No,
And
let's go.
Nebraska in 2005 was number 5, tied for number 5, 625 weeks, 66.5% of polls.
Okay.
So you've
Uh.
nailed 3 with only one question.
All right. I I kind of want to guess a Big 12 team, but I'm torn. The Big 12 team I want to guess is Oklahoma.
Because Texas never
Texas isn't
was.
back.
Oklahoma, which, to be fair, most of their time was while Oklahoma was in the Big 8 and Texas was in the Southwestern Conference. They weren't in the same conference for the bulk of this time. But yeah, Oklahoma 4th all time at that point, 629 polls. Texas, for the record, was 7th in
Ooh, okay.
2005.
That was the torn. It was
So Texas never was is a little bit of an exaggeration, but yeah.
that was torn between Oklahoma and Texas. Oh, I got 4 out of 6.
So you got a
Pac-12.
Pac-12 and a Big 10 left.
I have ideas, but I still don't know. I don't know how else to. All right, Michigan, Nebraska. I have the next guess in the Big 10. Might be more. I'm not positive. It might be more recent than historical success, but I kind of want to guess anyway. I'm going to say Wisconsin.
That is incorrect. That is actually very, very, very incorrect. They were 28th, so not the worst.
Okay.
28th, 232 poll appearances by that time.
So they're not in.
To show you how maybe off you were, North Carolina's 31st at that time, and we're only 14 behind.
Sick.
So they're kind of in that mucky middle.
Yeah. Yeah, like did it before, but not.
Yeah.
Not great.
I will give you the hint that the Big 10 and Pac-12 teams are both pretty obvious.
Pretty obvious.
They're basically who you think they would be. Yeah.
I think I got too smart with the Wisconsin.
Yeah, definitely.
So I'm gonna say then I'm gonna say Ohio State.
Ohio State is your Big 10 team, number 2, 704 appearances at that time.
And the Pac-12, my guess is USC.
And it's USC, 625, tied with Nebraska at the end of that season. If you're wondering about the overall to this day, it's basically the same list. Ohio State is now number 1, pretty well ahead of Michigan now, 960. Michigan had a 897, Oklahoma 882. Alabama is now in the top 5, 851, and are tied with Notre Dame still 851. Still in the top 5, yep. And pretty well ahead. Like USC, Notre Dame would have to fall out of the top 25, and USC would have to be ranked for 3 consecutive seasons in order for USC to pass Notre Dame at this point in appearances. But yeah, that's the top 5. Now, the reason I bring that up is to say that in 2005, Nebraska ranked 5th all time in college football poll appearances. And that was the last year that they were in the top 5 all time of college football poll appearances, to the point that they now have dropped to number 8. And in 2005, if you'd have put together a list of the most important college football programs, Nebraska would probably be on it. But if you ask somebody today, nobody cares about Nebraska.
True.
Except when they LOL fire their coach with a giant buyout 2 weeks before they didn't have to.
I would have just sucked for 2 years, 2 weeks. Yeah. I mean, why? Yeah. Why is it? Why?
Anyway. Yeah, we're not saving anything right now. And so that brings me to my first question. So we're going to discuss who maybe should be college basketball's blue bloods. The first question I think we have to address is whether this is a permanent status or whether this is a thing that you can lose, a thing you can gain, or a thing you can gain and lose. Like, how permanent or transient is being a blue blood? Because I have questions depending on
Depending where
on
this
what we
goes.
decide. There's some teams that have to be in it if we decide one way or the other.
Yeah, I think as current. Okay, so this is what I believe people are doing in like the 2010s and now is people are they're somewhat forgetting history in making way for current arguments, but it's not exclusive. And so in my head, it almost seems like the the teams that are considered blue bloods. There's a few criteria. You have to have multiple titles, which I would say all of the teams that are safely in the blue blood conversation have.
Yeah,
Uh,
100%.
I think the original well, five out of the six I would say that are comfortably in the conversation, their school colors are blue.
Yeah,
And so that has to like there's
that
no
played into
way
it. Yeah,
it has to play into it, right? Indiana being the only one that doesn't have blue in their school, yet they're still considered one because of Bob Knight. That like let's be serious. That's it.
that's it.
Um because of the popularity of this term blowing up in the 20 teens, you can kind of see why some teams are in and some teams are not. Like for instance, Duke being in is because their school is blue, because they have five titles, but all five of them have come in the last 31 years. And so if this was not a conversation, now, even though they got named in 1990 before they had a title, everybody knew what was coming with Duke because they had a sophomore Christian Leitner. I think they had Bobby Hurley on that team. They had just come off of, if you've watched ESPN 30 for 30s, they have the team that saved Coach K, right? Like he got hired in 1980 and they were trash for like 5 years. The Jay Billis team saved him, and then that class recruited the class that went runner up, I think, and then won two in a row. And so everybody knew that like they were going to get one, maybe not two, but they knew that they were going to get one. But that's the recency of this argument, right? Is on the other side, UCLA hasn't won since the mid 90s. And they went quite a while. They've gone many times without making the tournament. They've gone quite a while without winning the tournament. And so, but then you've got like the outside teams like Villanova, who I don't know that in my gut, it seems like they're a no. Even though they have the 85 title, they have two in the last 6 years. They seem like a no to me because of like the common perception of the term, but maybe they are. Maybe they are in. Maybe they do deserve to be in because of how good they've been. I mean, because their first title was a while back and they've won recently. So it's got to be. I think it's both. I think it's something that you can gain, and I think it's something you can lose. That's my opinion.
I agree that I agree that it has to be something you can gain or lose, and I think Indiana is 100% out. And here is my logic why. Nobody in their right mind would call North Carolina State a basketball blue blood in this moment.
No.
I wouldn't as a fan. In the last 20 years, NC State has been to 9 NCAA tournaments and missed 11. In the last 20 years, Indiana has been to 9 NCAA tournaments and missed 11.
But they have more historical titles, right?
And they
like
do.
They won for a longer stretch of time, which has to be part of it. Like their first one was in 1940, which put them on the map.
Right.
But their last one was in 1987.
Yes.
So the fact that they have five, so like at the time that they won in 87, they had the third most titles in college basketball. UCLA was still one. Kentucky had 5 when Indiana won their 5th. Duke
Right.
and UNC have passed Indiana since, but they've been blown out. Like they're just not good. They're not good anymore. Indiana's not. And same with State on a similar par. They won back in the day. They haven't been so successful recently. And so which is it? Like, is State a blue blood? Michigan
Right.
State has the same number of titles as State. Florida went back to back in this century. Villanova, Louisville, Kansas only has 4, and they're a blue blood. Kansas is in because of where basketball was invented and who started it.
Yeah.
That's why they're in, because UConn's got the same number, and they're in and out.
I think you have to disqualify India. They have 5 titles. One of them was in 1940, one of them was in 1953, and then the other 3 are Bob Knight. I think you have to disqualify them because post Bob Knight has been a hot mess. And I also think you have to have it be a thing that you can lose.
Yeah.
Because if not, NC State has to still be one. Because when they won their second title in 1983, they had the 6th most titles all time, had the 6th most appearances in the top 25 of all time, and had the same number of number 1 appearances in the top 25 as Kansas, who
Right.
I think we both would agree is solidly in this blue blood thing, if for no other reason than they're in a conference that nobody can beat them for like 2 decades.
Yeah.
So
they have been truly dominant.
So like I agree. So I agree with you that like multiple titles has to be a thing, but I think we also can agree that it's something you can lose, and that okay. So here are teams with 2 titles, and I think we all agree that maybe they're not blue bloods. San Francisco,
No.
Oklahoma State,
No.
Florida,
No.
Cincinnati,
No.
and they all have in common back-to-back national championships. San Francisco had Bill Russell. Oklahoma State just was very good back-to-back years. Florida had Joakim Noah and Jeff Green and just a solid NBA roster for 2 years. And Cincinnati's 2 were Oscar Roberts. Maybe top 5 basketball player all time. So I think those ones, and because that's not sustained success, it's multiple titles, but they're back-to-back and that's it. And so I think with the remaining teams, and just for those listening at home, we have NC State with 2 titles, Michigan State with 2 titles, Louisville. Now they have 3 again.
They have no God. he doesn't have to get that tattoo removed.
It's not official that they have 3 again. They're going to push to try and get that banner back up because they actually didn't get punished for anything lately, but that's the most recent scandal, and I don't think it applies to this, but we're going to call it 3 titles because it should be. You can't lose a title unless you give it to somebody else, and they didn't. Villanova has 3, and then the ones we know, Kansas has 4, Connecticut has 4, Indiana 5, Duke 5, Carolina 6, Kentucky 8, UCLA 11. We've disqualified most of the 2s. I'm going to go ahead and disqualify NC State, even though that means we have to disqualify another team later. But I'm going to disqualify them for us. And so if we're saying multiple titles has to be a thing you have, we're left with UCLA, Kentucky, North Carolina, Duke, Indiana, UConn, Kansas, Villanova, Louisville, and Michigan State.
Now, so that's just titles.
That's just on the title list.
National
there are other ways of measuring success. Just on the national titles, we've got those teams left on our list.
And you have to compare the other stuff too, right?
For sure.
I wouldn't consider Florida. Like, Florida's not in the top 20 all time in program wins. They are number 22 on number 1 appearances on the AP poll, and they are not in the top 30 of total appearances. And so, like you said, that's just an example. Yeah, that's just an example as to why you just probably ruled out San Fran, OK State, Florida, and Cincinnati. They did it really well back to back, and then they've fallen off
Since, nobody.
generally.
If you grab an 18-year-old off the street and get them to watch this college basketball season, they're not walking away saying, those are, absolutely top programs in the world. Yeah, no.
Yeah. But if you go to like all-time wins for programs, Indiana's only 10. Indiana's just barely in the top 10. By 6 wins are they in the top 10 and wins all time. The top 5 is Kansas, Kentucky, Carolina, Duke, and Temple.
Yep.
I would not.
Temple
That's before my time probably. I would not have guessed that. But so yes, you should be able to lose it and you should be able to gain it. But there's got to be this like we should come up with a formula.
I think
that's what we're going to have to do.
We should do a formula. I think
like a Ken bomb.
Let's do this. Let's do the easy ones first. Is Carolina a basketball blue blood?
Yes.
100%. Titles in multiple decades, the last 3 decades, not counting this one that's not over. So that's sustained success, multiple ACC titles. They're first all-time in Final Four appearances, beating out some of those schools that have more titles. Third all-time in wins, like easy, right? Yep. Sustained success forever. Kentucky.
Yes.
Kentucky before John Calipari, fallen off. John Calipari, Kentucky, yes.
Revived, yes. He revived them, but I mean, they had titles in the 40s and the 50s and one in the 70s, 2 in the 90s, and then 1 in the 20 teens. And who knows, like they've got top 5 recruiting classes every year. And so it could literally be any time that they show back up and win another one, right? Like they're not San Francisco.
No.
They're not like they didn't fall off. Like they're still in the tournament. Well, yeah, they're still in the tournament. They're still winning games. Yes. Solidly.
They are very much the Alabama of college basketball and always will be because they have a giant stadium for a reason. Those people love basketball. They'll always support it and you get the right person there and it's always going to be good. Duke.
If we're talking historical, not really. They have Coach K, and that's it. Like the same thing that you said for. Yeah. And this is not hate. This is not haterism. I mean, they will be considered one, and they are considered one. They were considered one somehow before they even won, just knowing what was coming, I guess. But if you take Coach K out of that scenario, I don't know how many do they have. Do they have any? Like he's the GOAT college basketball coach. There's no doubt. But he is a blue blood. Is the program historically one? I guess it depends on how much the history aspect falls into it.
Yeah, they definitely had some success before. Not that success, obviously. I think they are a blue blood because I think we both agree this is something you can move into and fall out of. That it depends on the when you're deciding this list. Duke is one. If they go a decade somehow without that same success, I think it starts to wane just like Indiana or just like UCLA could have over time. We haven't talked about them yet, but Duke is definitely in that position where was it the guy or was it the program? I actually think North Carolina is a similar situation. They've had 2 coaches with sustained eras of success, but they're also 2 of the best coaches all time. So I think Carolina's in a spot where do you have a third guy that's going to do that? Is it the program that's making this happen with the coach, or was it those 2 coaches? I think that's something to be. Both of those are in a spot where they have to prove themselves as programs.
Yeah,
now.
And you could say the same for at least one of the other ones that you're about to mention too. And so that does have to be part of the argument. I think multiple coaches being able to do it there is significant.
Yeah,
but yeah.
All right, we're gonna go to the other easy one because we've already said they should be in Kansas.
Yeah. I think they have to be with their range of success over time from the first one in 52 and then 88 and then 08 and then 2022. Obviously, the most recent champion.
You're where basketball was invented. You're where the tournament idea, much love to Everett Case, but you're where the tournament idea began. And you've had Fog Allen and Larry Brown and Roy Williams and Bill Self. Right. We
Tough.
don't have the Duke. We don't have the Duke in Carolina. I mean, we have even more evidence than the Carolina
Yes.
situation at Kansas. So I think that's solidly there.
Yeah. Even though they only have 4, and they've done it over a longer period of time. So.
Here are the questionable. I'm going to put them in a questionable yes category for the next set. UCLA.
I think they have to be. They have to have been one at some point. Have they played their way out of it due to a lack of recent championships? Maybe, but they are 7th all time in wins. And so, but does that historical success carry over today? Is this what you're referring to when you say fall out of it because you're not good, right? I mean, they are good now. Don't get me wrong, but like they haven't won a title in over 25 years.
So UCLA 5th all time in top 25 appearances. If we go all time, if we just do this century, which by the way started in 2001, not 2000. If we just do this century, UCLA is 21st. Baylor has more top 25 appearances than they do. Pittsburgh has more top 25 appearances than they do.
That's salty. That's tough.
They're in the neighborhood of Maryland and Purdue. And that is where I think I view them as a program, is in that group of schools that you can see at any point being very good. But I don't look at UCLA and immediately think, I don't see UCLA on the television and say immediately I got to watch this because there's 3 NBA guys on the floor or just really good players and this is a good team that I want to remember. Like I don't do that with UCLA. So historically, yes. Recently, no. And I think that's where a Carolina or a Duke could be down the road. They could be still a blue blood, or we could be having that discussion about them because I don't know for sure that they would be.
If Roy Williams had stayed any longer, we might be in that conversation.
Same conversation, right?
Yeah,
Same.
I mean, because we would have had multiple years since winning a national title and losing seasons, like bad, like decent players every once in a while, but bad teams, just no results at all.
And if you look at it, UCLA has 11 titles, but they won 10 in 12 years from 1964 to 1975.
Yeah.
And then they've won 1 since then.
Are they in the same conversation as like a Florida? Because like the same core, the same coach, and then they had a couple player after player after player,
big centers that took them through 8 years of their history. Yeah,
and that was all during a time when the NCAA tournament competition was minimal,
especially for them out west. They only played
especially Western. For them. Nobody. They were playing. They were walking, crawling into the national championship games.
Yeah. Actual regionals back then, so they were only playing teams out west, and
they were running through it. Yeah, not even close.
I would leave them in as a blue blood out of respect for the history, but also solidly near Indiana territory for me.
They're close, yeah. They're close because of
the
historical success they have. I think you have to still call them one. If by 2064, which is when they won their first one, they haven't won another one, it's like, okay, bye-bye. you can only bandwagon for so long.
And if it was a different situation where like this century they were still in the top 10 or so of poll appearances and things like that, top 10 in wins this century, then maybe we're looking at that different. But it's really, I mean, it's a fall off of big fall offs. And right. Here's another questionable one for me. Michigan State.
Michigan State's a no. I don't think anyone would consider them.
You say no. Since 2001, they've been in 72% of all polls. That's top 5.
And they've had 10 total Final Four appearances, which is tied for 5th all time. But how much of that is Tom Izzo?
So the
Like
first
he's
title,
always winning, but not winning. So like
that's
Tom
true.
Tom Izzo has been there for quite some time. Like he is up there in like total Final Four appearances for a coach. And so again, is that like the Coach K thing where, or the John Wooden thing, or
So
like the Jim Calhoun thing for the team that we haven't talked about yet?
yeah, their first Final Four was a 1957, so an ancient-ish run, and then 79 with Magic, and then
Yep.
all of the rest of those, the other 8 have been Tom Izzo. So very much a situation like Krzyzewski. It's all one guy. And we're starting to see that he's fallen off a little bit. And is that a situation where the program is going to be in a spot where it can't necessarily recover? I also say no to Michigan State, but I understand the arguments. Yes.
I understand how Michigan State fans want to be in the conversation
I think they're
because
in the next group. Yeah.
they're in like a B tier, right?
Yeah.
For like all time. I'm sort of leaning towards this blue blood thing as like an all time great program. Like we were saying, there's a few safely in A tier. There's a few like low A, about to fall into B. Like we like to do quarterbacks like this for the NFL.
We're doing
In
Keyshawn's
tiers.
Cups.
We like to do the tiers. Like I would say Michigan State as a historical program is less so than recent success. But if they've only won one. Tom Izzo's only won one. Of course, there can't be but so many Coach K's, right? But they've been good recently, and they're falling back off. And so, yeah, I think they're safely out of this conversation specifically.
All right. So now the program you've mentioned a couple times, there's two that are going to be kind of an argument. UConn, and then their conference brethren, Villanova. Let's do UConn first. As a child who was 12 years old in 1999, watching UConn win that first title and beat Duke, who, as a person from North Carolina, I thought that Duke team was amazing. I say yes, but also it's Jim Calhoun.
That's
and
the
then they
argument.
had one random run with Kevin Ollie as coach, and
as an 8 seed, I think.
Yeah. So they weren't even a dominant team in that season.
No, they barely made the tournament. For all intents and purposes, they barely made the NCAA tournament in 2014 and made a run. And there's something to be said for that, because like that's the fun part of the tournament is like if you make it in, you just got to win 6 games, and that's what they did. But they weren't a great team. Like I would consider, I keep going back to UNC because that's what I'm most familiar with. I would consider that 09 North Carolina team a top 5 or top 10 college basketball teams of all time. They won all 6 tournament games by double digits. Like that was not a competition. Connecticut that UConn team had a much harder time in 2014. They were not a great team. They just went on a run. My gut for UConn says no. But based on our arguments, it's hard to say no, like educatedly. That's not a word.
Here's where the no can come in. So Calhoun gone in 2013. Since then, they've made 4 NCAA tournaments in a decade, basically. They've only won 2. Sorry, it's not 2 games because they won the title in 2014. They've only made it out of the first round twice.
Ooh.
They won the title in 14. They won a game in 16, and that's it. They've only won 1 conference championship since Calhoun retired.
Yeah.
They've won no regular season championships since Calhoun retired.
That seems to me like Michigan State B tier territory.
I think so too. I think if you ask the question while Calhoun is coaching and they're on that run of 3 titles with him, that's a different discussion. But remember, that 11 title, the 2011 one, is very similar to the 14. They were playing on the first day of the giant 16-team Big East tournament, which means they were like 9th or worse in the conference. So they weren't world beaters that year either. So they've got 2 years where they were the elite of the elite, and then they've got 2 years where they were Cinderellas.
Great
And
coaching,
yeah,
essentially got
well,
them there.
great. In 2011, it was just great clutch basketball play by Kemba Walker, and then 2014 was Shabazz Napier, same idea. Cinderella titles obviously mean something, but if we're talking about Blue Bloods, it's that week in, week out success.
Always good.
And Connecticut hasn't been that for a little bit.
I agree.
Same question, same part of the country. I would be willing to bet the fall off of one of these schools led to the rise of the other. Villanova is the hottest discussion in college basketball lately. Are they a blue blood? And this is the one I don't know the answer to.
Historically, they did win in 85.
As a Cinderella. Make sure we know that. 8 seed.
Yeah. So not a great team again. The 16 and 18 teams were top 3, top 5 in the country. Great. But that's one coach.
Last 6 years with one coach.
Yes. And that coach is now retired. And so I think we're in North Carolina Duke territory in that regard, where you lose a Hall of Fame legendary coach who won the school those titles. And we're going to have to see what they do. I would say they're high B. That's my gut. That's my gut feeling.
Yeah. And maybe the leaders of Group B, because this century, 8th all-time in poll appearances, which is getting ready to cause an argument when we get to some of the schools we haven't talked about at all. This decade, 5th all-time in poll appearances.
Right.
So recent history is absolutely there. I'm like you. There should be some sort of sustained success to get them to be a blue blood. They very much would make me say, well, if Villanova's a blue blood, then so is Michigan State. Right. So is some of the other schools we left out. Louisville's
a no to me too.
I think Louisville's a no to me too. They've got 3 titles, but they had
one vacated.
We
gotta call it.
we got to keep it 100. One of those was vacated. They were a solid, great team in the 80s.
That's where 2 of their titles came, was 1980 and 1986, and the 2013 team was a really good team. And their title was vacated for off the court things. They weren't like point shaving or anything stupid. Like they did the reason for the vacation was not for their on the court play. Like they won that title.
Now they were owners under Denny Crum, who's the coach from the 80s. They're owners of a very long NCAA tournament appearance streak. Like, with the exception of 01 and 02, they were there every year from from early 70s through the era we're thinking of. So they are very much in the discussion of always being around, always being good, always being near awesome. But I think that's what I think of them as.
But that's a Michigan State, right?
Yeah.
It's a Tom Izzo Final Four appearances, but never winning. It's so
Michigan State, UConn, Louisville, Villanova, I think all together are the same kind of program. Some have more success, some have less success. Always around, never quite there. So I wouldn't put any of them there.
Yeah. So where are we at? We have 5 teams in, and Indiana's out.
We identified UCLA, Kentucky, Carolina, and Duke. We've excluded Indiana, and also we put in Kansas. So we put in 6 schools, all blue. I want to talk about 2 schools.
These are going to be trick questions.
One is for like my time period and a couple of old timers. One is new. One's not going to be much of a controversy. One is going to make people slam on brakes and set fires to the wilderness.
Set fire to the rain.
The one that's not going to be crazy, and it's going to be a no, I think, but they were mentioned in some of the articles for a reason. Arizona.
My gut
Only
says
one,
no, but I need you to sell it. Like that. That's
it's
the point I'm at.
only one national title. Fair. But Arizona has appeared in 4 Final Fours. Overall, they are 11th all-time in wins. They would have been the only other Western school other than UCLA to be that high up. They were kind of their foil at times. And if we're talking about this century, I keep bringing that up, just an arbitrary date. If we're talking about this century, they're 7th all time in top, or 7th this century in top 25 appearances. And then this decade, they're 8th all time in top 25 appearances.
Yeah.
And it's Lute Olson, obviously, is the big name coach that made it happen. Sean Miller, kind of, but has never really capitalized on the success. I just wanted to mention their name. I don't think they're a blue blood, but I do think they belong without the titles in that same group with Michigan State, UConn,
Yeah.
where they could very well just takes the right person in the right place, and it's a go.
Sure. Yeah, they're 11th all time in wins. So that says something. That's sustained success, right? Like whether you're even UCLA dominating when they played, they're still 7th all time in wins, and so I feel like that's a solid indicator of sustained success. Because winning the tournament is hard. Like that can't be everything. But
that's what I'm saying. Yeah, tournament appearances, where you get in the tournament. Yeah, that could the AP appearances, those things are.
Yeah, got to be something, right? And so all time wins, they're up there. I mean, they have had sustained success long term, but I can't tell you how many times recently I've picked them in my bracket and they have just not won, right? Like you said, they only won once, one national title, and they've had decent teams. Like they've had really solid teams recently, and they just can't get over it. And so it does seem like they're like that one. They're like that one thing away from potentially winning additional titles, but right now I think they're a no. I don't think you can put them there.
Here's the one. I'm going to tell you some facts about them. Then I'm going to say the name, and everybody's going to lose their collective blanks. This school has been in the AP poll 312 times, which is only 28th all time. That's not great. They've been number 1 in the AP poll 42 times, which is the 8th most ever. 8th most number 1 appearances ever. If we just use this century, they have appeared in the top 25 the 4th most times. Right? We've let in 6 schools. The only schools above them are 3 of those 6 schools. I'm just saying. I'm not saying. I'm just saying.
I ain't saying. I'm just saying.
Their problem is that while it is sustained success, it is not sustained championship success. They have lots of stuff going on, but they've only been into 2 Final Fours. Both of them were runner-ups, and they're both in the last 5 years.
Gonzaga.
So it's Gonzaga.
No.
Which I think is the right answer. But from 1999 to now, that's where all of those...
Yeah.
Like all of those top 25 appearances, all of those number 1 appearances.
Yeah.
That's where they're from. And so, and it's not just, it really is just Mark Few.
Yes.
And it's not the Krzyzewski level, but I think it's worth the discussion, even though it's going to be a no. I feel like
maybe they've played their way into the B tier, like that second level on the cusp You've got to have you got to have something. You have to now the thing that in my head goes against them is that they play in such a weak conference. So their
They are the
regular
UCLA of
yeah, their regular season is always going to look great, which is obviously going to keep them high in the polls. They very rarely have a chance to really get knocked out. They're not playing. They're not playing a Big Ten basketball schedule, and they're not playing an ACC basketball schedule. So there's like St. Mary's is really their only regular season threat outside of the one-off Shabazz Napier type stuff or the preseason tournaments where they're paired with a Duke, UNC, Kansas, Kentucky, whoever. They just don't have the same strength of schedule in my mind. Now, on paper, could I be completely wrong? No. Could I be a little wrong? Yes. Like I'm not giving them quite as much grace in that department as I could be, but it's just not the same. They would tell you it's not the same. They can't deny that. Now, let them join the Pac-12, which isn't fantastic at basketball recently, but it'd be better than the West Coast Conference, right? Like St. Mary's is usually ranked. That's like you see that game on television and they're playing in like a Division II gym or a high school gym. That's what they're playing in. It's crazy. That's why they're good. In my mind, they have a great coach who's a great recruiter. They play a really easy schedule. If you're playing that easy of a schedule, you have to like that's the proof to me is you've got all these conference titles, you've got all these number ones recently, you've got all these rankings recently, you've got Final Four runs recently. You can't beat the best teams because you're not playing the best teams in the regular season.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think so we've pretty much, and I said 6 a second ago, and I don't think we actually have 6. We had 5.
Five safely.
Kentucky, North Carolina, Duke, Kansas, UCLA. And when we look at, if we did want to do a formula, here's some things we might would include. There are only 5 schools in AP poll history whose average rank is the top 10. It's those 5.
Bam. Nailed it.
There are only 3 schools who've had 10% of their poll appearances be number 1, and it's Duke, UCLA, and Kentucky.
Nailed it.
By the way, 4th and 5th number 1 appearances are Carolina and Kansas.
Nailed it.
So that agrees with us. The top 5 in Final Fours: Carolina, UCLA, Duke, Kentucky, Kansas.
Nailed it.
They're all within 5 of each other, and then it's 6 more before you get to Michigan State and Ohio State at 10. And then titles: UCLA, Kentucky, Carolina, Duke. We left out Indiana, left out Connecticut, and we went to Kansas. I think the numbers agree with us on who we put in. I think for me, there's like A prime where like Kentucky is in. And then I would say actually Kentucky and Kansas are in. Carolina and Duke are probably in forever, but depends on how this next couple of coaching tenures go. And then UCLA is teetering on the edge, ready to fall out.
On the way out.
Indiana has, and those other schools that we mentioned, I think are all in that kind of second tier. And then there's a third tier that we didn't even mention, but they're, the schools, we know who they are. The middle of college basketball. Yep. All right. I feel kind of satisfied about our work here.
I like that.
They're all blue too.
That's got to be part of it. Absolutely has to be part of it.
And it was kind of Game of Thrones. We just offed somebody out of a window with Indiana. We just tossed them.
Off the island. You're not worthy.
All right. Any last thoughts?
I want to hear people's reactions. That's what
Very
I want to hear.
Yeah.
I want to know, like, not based on what we said. I want a discussion here. I need somebody to tell me how we did. That's what I want to know. That's the only thing I had. That's the only thing I have to say. I feel like I rambled a lot. I want someone to tell me how they think we did.
Maybe it's as small as you think UCLA definitely is in, and we're all idiots for like questioning it. Mm-hmm. Maybe you're mad because I said Kentucky is definitely in and Carolina and Duke aren't. That's fine.
Some homers will definitely say that.
This is the one time, if you're that one Villanova fan I'm kidding. They have plenty of fans. They fill up an NBA arena a couple times a year. If you're the Villanova fans out there and you want to say, no, we absolutely are, I'm sure you're tired of making this argument, but we would love to hear that too. This is the one time we would love to hear discussion. We'll post about it on our socials. Get in touch with us. And if you've got a story about it you want us to do, get in touch with us there as well.
That one, yeah.
All right. Well, until next time, that's been What You Don't Know About College Basketball's Blue Bloods. Thanks for listening.
Bye. Thank you for listening to this episode of What You Don't Know About Sports. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please leave us a review, 5 stars only please, and hit that subscribe button wherever you listen. If you have a great sports story, we want to hear about it. You can connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at WYDKAS Podcast, and on our YouTube channel at What You Don't Know About Sports Podcast. All episodes are written, recorded, and edited by us. Stay tuned for the next episode.